I'd like to make an acknowledgement on behalf of myself and my family, Bundjalung Nation members. I'm currently living on the Awakwa lands near Byron Bay, or known as Cavanbar, by the traditional owners and custodians of the area. And just like to acknowledge the tenacity, endurance, resilience of all Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders who have endured the legacy of colonisation in this country. Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be speaking to you today, Bronwyn, for this episode of the Brisbane Writers Festival Authors and Illustrators series of interviews. You've had an incredible career, and I've been really looking forward to speaking to you because I'm just fascinated by the sort of breadth and depth of your practice. So for those of you who don't know, I'm lucky enough today to be speaking to Bronwyn Bancroft, who is an incredible author, illustrator, art practitioner, activist, academic. You wear many hats, Bronwyn. You've got a Diploma of Visual Arts from Canberra in studio practice and visual art. You've got your Doctor of Philosophy, I understand, and a number of very prestigious accolades, including the Dromkey Medal for your contribution to Australian literature. You've been nominated for prestigious international children's literature awards, including the Hans Christian Andersen Award and the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Awards. So it doesn't get much higher than that. And you were the Australian finalist for the Ezra Jack Keats Award for Excellence in Children's Book Illustration as well, I understand. And also other accolades, like you were the recipient of the Alison Bush Graduate Medal for your contribution to the Indigenous community. And I think last year you were the recipient of the New South Wales Aboriginal Creative Fellowship at the State Library, which you're currently working on at the moment. And am I right in thinking you were the inaugural awardee, the inaugural recipient of that? So that's just
it was a real honour and just really great to get into the research and have the support of the librarians, the career librarians at the State Library, a very progressive library. So the State Library was basically about research. I'm going to be doing an exhibition there, and what I based it on was doing research around the area that I come from, which is near Grafton, and our family have endured there since colonisation. So the first white people that came into our area came in the 1840s and basically were given our land. And then we had a series of very tragic events in terms of massacres and displacement. But we've still been able to stay there because my English grandfather married my grandmother, who was she was put into domestic service. So her and her sister, by the white people that took our land. So he ended up marrying both the sisters because the first sister died, Emily, in childbirth, and then my granny came out and looked after her, and he subsequently married her, the late 1800s. So this is not a time when white men were marrying Aboriginal women, and so the historical, social, environmental factors around that has always interested me since I was a very small kid. And now I've been able to delve into the displacement and what the country would have looked like before. It's overwhelming, actually. But it's been a real privilege and an honour to be able to have the support of the librarians at the State Library to get into this. Really, it's just heartbreaking, actually. It's confronting, and it's I was having a discussion the other day, and it's like, it's not that I'm setting out to make people feel guilty. I'm setting out to unveil this history that's been denied in this country because it's always been interpreted through a non-Aboriginal lens. And so I think it's going to be a fantastic opportunity to illustrate the horrendous nature of what colonisation did, but then also the fantastic opportunity to praise survival and endurance and ingeniousness and just being able to still be here. Pretty epic.
Yeah, it sounds like an incredibly intense voyage and a lot of sort of grief to process as well. Like,
Yeah,
I imagine personally for you and kind of collectively that you're kind of responsible for processing that collective grief a little bit through what you're doing.
Yeah, well, I was the senior person for the native title claim, which was really just not great. But during the process, I think you do understand that the grief it is something that you actually have to do. You have to go back and explore the idea of what it must have been like, and then also the lives that didn't have the opportunity to have a life. So the suppression through colonisation and murder meant that the majority of my clan were unable to survive. So I always try to populate my imagination with the idea of what it must have been like and how big my extended family would have been if everyone had survived.
That's huge.
Yeah, it's pretty, it's epic.
So in the process of working through all this, is the sort of rhythm of it that you do a deep dive into research around events and people and the history, and then will you be sort of unpacking that in a body of work?
Yes, yeah, I will be. I'll be exhibiting at the State Library in 2025 or 24. I don't know, but it'll take a while to get organised. So what I've done is I've retrieved glass calotypes and printed them onto canvas, and then I'm going to reinterpret the imposition of the land clearing and the tents from the early colonial people. And then I'm also going to do some writing, and then I'm also going to do a drop-down link for my family to condense all of the literature so that they can actually read everything that the white man wrote. And there's some pretty horrendous sort of, moments like, you can take that gin because she's not worth nothing. She's not bleeding yet, so she's 10, so you can have her. And these are all references that are written in these journals. So when you're writing, and and obviously men, white women didn't get the vote till 1902, black women 1962 in this country. So when you're dealing with something like that, it's from the hand of a man. But the dismissive nature of these young children and women just being treated like just nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Like
just
complete denial of humanity.
It's really confronting. But it's something, like I said before, you have to do it because I think that, as you call it, the deep dive into truth. If Australians are ready to embrace the truth, it'll be a far healthier country, and not only will we all better human beings, but the country itself will improve, and people will care more for the climate and more for the water because they'll understand our marriage to our Mother Earth. And that's what we actually stay here for, not to make a huge imprint on the country in terms of devastation, but in terms of actually creating a forward thinking future for our grandchildren. And for the human population to survive, we need to have a better relationship, more symbiotic relationship with the country we live on.
And I'd love to revisit that idea as well when we talk a little bit more about your books that you've both authored and illustrated, because I think that sort of sense of nurturing and deep sort of connection and appreciation really comes through in those beautifully. But just staying where we are at the moment, is with part of your, you know, like taking these writings and sharing them with your family and bringing them into the light. Yeah, like you're saying, it's a bit like lancing an abscess or something, isn't it, for the whole, you know, consciousness of the nation, that kind of. But in terms of your own family and your practice, like one of the things that I was interested in is, I mean, you've been working as a practicing artist since the 80s. Am I right?
Yeah, kind of. Well, you know, I started studying at 17. I mean, you know, it depends how, it's the time and the place sort of stuff. It's like I went to art school from high school at 17.
Yeah.
So I actually started and did a 4-year degree in Canberra. So I was 21 when I went to Sydney, and then I was hand painting garments to make money. I mean, I was married, but because I married my teacher, they used to say I could get straight A's that way.
And did you? Did it work?
No, he didn't teach me English after year 10, but, you know, we did have a clandestine relationship, and, you know, I stayed married to him for 17 years, but I moved to Sydney, and I kind of set up a shop in 1985. So I've always been doing art. And like I consider that no category, no time that I started, because I was drawing from a really early age, and I was fascinated by light and shadow, and ever since I was like 7 or 8, I've just always drawn and recorded stuff. Yeah.
Actually, maybe we'll talk a little bit about your speaking, because you bring up, you know, 7 and 8-year-old Bronwyn, and like what you were fascinated by at that age, and the sort of sensibility that you had as a child. Because I think, you know, like you're talking about the importance to your kind of communication and sharing this idea of, you know, connection to country, and you're doing that for the next generation in your picture books. But one thing that really strikes me about your work is how beautifully unpatronising it is for kids. If we look at your books that really celebrate Australia, got Why I Love Australia and Shapes of Australia, Colours of Australia, Patterns of Australia. And, you know, on the surface, they're sort of learning books for quite young children. You know, they're presented as, you know, preschool books, you know, a shape book, a colour book. You know, and they're usually quite transactional and pedestrian and, you know, a bit ordinary. And yours struck me as being more of a kind of a love letter to the country, you know, and just a sort of a vehicle for sort of sharing that sort of wonder and appreciation of just being here in this place. And like, I love the way you don't, you know, you obviously respect your audience, you know, and you kind of have that sense that children are capable of very complex reactions to things, and to understand really complex ideas, and they have a real sensibility. And I wonder if that's, you know, what you were like as a child. But I was just looking, you know, when I was reading them, you know, your language in those books is incredibly resonant and sensory, and there are all these phrases that, you know, like beams of secret light and gorges that plummet into serpentine shadows and filigree ferns and things. And, you know, that's not the sort of language you find in a preschool book, but it's exactly the kind of language that, you know, children should be exposed to and deserve to be exposed to. So, yeah, so I was just, I was interested in sort of what you were like as a child, and how you kind of perceived that, you know, sort of began creating, but also your thoughts on what children deserve in literature and what you set out to do with those books.
I think, look, I was just, I was the last of 7, so largely ignored, kind of, you know, always yelling, say, wait for me, wait for me. 3 elder brothers, 3 elder sisters. So 3 elder sisters first, then 3 brothers, then me. And I I think I spent a lot of time. I remember like lino. I just remember lino all the time in our house in Tenterfield. And if you got underneath the old kitchen table and you rubbed your eyes, all the patterns would go crazy, like psychedelic stuff. So I'd often be finding myself lying on the lino, which is ultimately the ultimate child patterning moment, and then sitting underneath the kitchen table and rubbing my eyes, because then I would see all these great designs. We always went to the bush. I mean, our afternoons were yabbying, like, you know, getting bits of meat and string and going up to the local dam, running around the railway line, going to the dump and trying to find anything that we could upcycle. Now the word is upcycle, but claim, because we weren't, like, we didn't have any money. So a lot of our resources actually came from the dump. So I think, and Dad being a sleeper cutter, because that was the only job he could get as a black man, was working in the bush cutting sleepers, and we'd often go to the camps with him, and then we'd go to Linesville, which is like our ancestral home. And I think that sort of absolute saturation of beautiful imagery, I think, really crystallized for me when I had to leave and go to Canberra. I mean, the Northern Tablelands, like where I grew up, it's an absolutely wondrous landscape of, you know, granite outcrops and just amazing, like, scenery. It's just, it's mind-boggling how amazing it is. And I think that made a huge imprint on me in terms of my, like, the impact was just like, I want to paint this, I want to record this, I want to be this. And in relation to the young children, I mean, I think that the primary time to have any kind of influence on a child is really from 0 to 5. So with my little grandchild, she's 4, and we read 3 or 4 books a night, and then I do a makeup story, and then I do a song makeup story. So, and I never patronize children. I've done a lot of teaching in schools, like art and literacy workshops for refugee kids and stuff in a long time ago. But one of the things that I've always said to children in a classroom situation is that I'm going to use really big words, because people will always try to confuse you and make you feel small because you don't know what entrepreneur means. And then they'll go, what's an entrepreneur? And I go, someone who has the initiative to make a business or is inventive. And then they go, entrepreneur. And so they, like, you bring these words into their lives. And I didn't think that I was particularly intelligent. I mean, I was told I had a 90 IQ from my school. So that sort of idea that you would already be slated to be obsolete at the age of, you know, 12 or 13.
Wow.
Is quite weird. And I did bring up the local school and ask them for my IQ testing, and they said, oh, we don't have anything like that anymore, we lost it. And I was like, I've got, you know, the 4 degrees, but at the end of the day, I kind of knew I wasn't dumb by the time I got onto year 11 and 12. And I was like, wow, you could have really had a major impact on me if I'd, you know, I was put in all the dumb classes, you know, so like the C and D classes. And when my prospective husband came, he actually said that girl's too bright to be in those classes. So I definitely owe him that, getting me out of those not dumb, but the ones that are slated by the institution as not having much potential.
If it's any consolation, my sixth form report summary comment was, it's a pity about Sarah, she showed such promise.
Well, I'll never forget, my description was, Bronwyn needs to stop looking out the window.
Yeah, that was it. I think all the best people look out the windows and appreciate
They're trying to escape.
Yeah. Yeah, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But along those lines, you mentioned your dad, and I think I remember reading somewhere that you said that his education was very curtailed because he was like you say, a black man, and you mentioned he could only get the job at the railway, was it?
Yeah.
And he didn't have an opportunity to kind of reach his potential either in terms of education. And looking at that and the work you're doing now, and the length of time you've been kind of working actively in the art field, and also sort of socially involved and working for your community and things. Have you, across the span of those decades, what sort of shift have you seen in the way opportunity, First Nations voices and creativity are respected, and how much further do you think there is to go in terms of, I know that's a huge question, but I'm really interested.
Yeah, I think generational change. I mean, it's a really hard question because, I think my father lived in the shadow of what he wanted to be, and he was always kind of frustrated about the fact that he needed this education, but he ended up being an engineer and a corporal in World War II. And so he's a very significantly intelligent man. And he really sort of, I think the society, really looked down on this lack of education, but actually they weren't allowed to go to school. So I remember being in the back of the Ford, and he'd drop off at the local pub before we'd go home to ancestral lands. He'd be able to take 2 bottles, what they call long necks, in a brown paper bag from the back of the pub. Wow. So I remember as a small child him going in there, and active discrimination. That he would have been 100 in the 9th of December last year. So I'd have to say that there has been improvement. You would want to actually think of that. I mean, 1992, I started illustrating books. At art school, I was told I was useless illustrator, so I stopped doing it. I had no future in that area. And I think I'm up to 45 books. But my personal quest around that was that the books that I had in the local library when I grew up was Captain Cook Discovered Australia. There was no Aboriginal content, literally, in the Tenterfield Library. So it's that old saying, if I can't see me, I can't be me. And so that's been a personal quest of mine in relation to my journey as an illustrator author, to try and fill up some of these libraries with just a different view. And I mean, obviously it's my personal view, but you'd have to say that it's improved, but ultimately there is an enormous amount of work to do. I mean, I live in a regional area, and I look at the artists and how they struggle to get recognition, and if they're not as articulate as someone who might have gone to university, they're again discriminated against. And that has to stop. We can't just have people being the spokesperson for Aboriginal communities, or even, that are just articulate, because sometimes the content isn't as great as it should be because they haven't had the lived experience. And so there is still a lot of work to do in regional areas, a lot in terms of inherent racism and lack of opportunities for Aboriginal people in the mainland, for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, you're obviously doing it as much as you personally can, in terms of that. You're incredibly involved with mentoring First Nations artists, aren't you? And the Bumali Aboriginal Artists Cooperative, I think you've been a founding member, and kept that afloat and going from strength to strength over decades, isn't it?
Well, in 2000, it was set up in 1987 by 10 artists, and I was lucky enough to be one of those artists, because I had my shop going in 85. So I was rolling around in Sydney, which I didn't even know anyone in Sydney, except I went and met Gary Foley, who kind of pointed me in the right direction. And then I in 2009, there was a pretty huge financial calamity, and we nearly lost the building, and there was a very large financial remit. I was asked to go in and help. Good grief. For 5 years of volunteering, enormous hours, had a small child. I think her grief-stricken moment was, not for Marley again, Mum. And it was all volunteer, so no income. So I used to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and send hundreds of emails to people. Couldn't get any funding. We got evicted by the Department of Arts Communities, and I can't remember what other part of the acronym was. But this lady came down and said, "We're evicting you." And I said, "Well, actually, we're not moving." And then we found out we owned the building. I got a really good set of lawyers through Robin Ayres, who was the director at Arts Law, who's a friend. And I said, "We really need help here. I need help." So it was a rigorous and absolutely still to this day, it's got a lot of rigor around it and a lot of demand, but it's back on track, or like I like to say, black on track. And it's thriving, and that means we're giving opportunity to so many more artists. And that's one of the reasons I volunteered to get it back on its feet from 2009 till now, was to that sounds like it's a bad word, allow, to give more Aboriginal artists the opportunity that I've had and so many other people had in that journey of that Aboriginal cooperative, and
to keep that avenue open.
You can't just make an Aboriginal organisation. You can't let it sink. It's just stupid, because it's especially an arts organisation, because the advocacy and the endurance of the organisation is a testimonial to the courage of the people involved. And
just
we
about,
need that.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I mean, I think volunteering is a very light and fluffy word for what you've actually done. I mean, you've kind of gone in and been a warrior for it, not just a volunteer. It sounds like you've had to fight tooth and nail to keep it on track at great personal cost, by the sound of it. If you're dealing, I mean, getting up at 3 a.m. with young children and the amount of sort of your personal energy, I suppose, is one word for it. But it sounds like, your investment in keeping those avenues open for other people must actually come at a personal cost.
Yeah, it was huge. I mean, I look back at it and I did an artwork, and it was like trying to get grant applications, like I was doing, and it's this big. I stuck all the grant applications together for about just 1 year, and we failed every time. They were just told, "Go away, you don't know how to write a grant application." I mean, I've got 4 degrees, come on, guys. And I've got real experience. I grew up as an Aboriginal person in a small country town. I went to art school as an Aboriginal person. I'm in my community as an Aboriginal person. And when you get assessors writing comments like, "You don't know how to write a grant application," it's not only it's sort of, it takes the breath out of you, but they're the kind of people that make me work harder. And it's the legacy that will be left is not from my endurance and the commitment that I did. It will be the artists that have continued to be practicing and growing in stature and courage and professionalism that got the opportunity. So when someone tries to stymie me by saying, really highly irregular things like, "You're stupid," and they're the assessors, you've got to question the framework around that and go, "Well, I'm just going to keep working harder for my mob, because this is the way that we are." And that divisiveness and sort of cynicism around telling people they're useless is something that was employed by colonizers. You're not worth anything. You have no merit. You're dumb. You're black. You're useless. So that kind of judgmental attitude by anyone just inspires the hell out of me to keep moving.
Yeah, brilliant.
Totally.
Yeah. So you come out fighting when you're
Absolutely.
the idiot like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you've done your collaboration with Sally Morgan, and that reminds me of the book that you did with Sally Morgan. I'm having a lack of caffeine moment. Dreaming.
In your dreams.
In your dreams. In your dreams. Yeah. That's very empowering. Sort of a sense, giving that sense of possibility and kind of following what you want to achieve and pursuing it and visualizing, you know, like you were saying, if you can't see it, you can't be it, like thinking about, you know, who you are and who you want to be and where you want to be. And
and I think Sally, I mean, you know, I'll never forget reading My Place, and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna meet this woman and be absolutely best friends with her. And then we ended up meeting and being best friends and exhibiting together. And she's amazing, Sally. I mean, she shies away from the publicity and stuff like that, but she's such an enduring person in terms of a woman, in terms of, you know, what she did in breaking down the boundaries with her amazing book. And then subsequently, like me with my children, she's working with Ezekiel and Amberlyn Clay Mulliner. And they're writing and illustrating stories, and they're just a wonderful example of an Aboriginal family who are returning stories to the greater society. I just adore them.
Yeah, that's quite something, isn't it? It's lovely having that family voice as well as. Oh, sorry, I've managed to lose you. There you go. So how many books have you and Sally worked on together now?
I can't remember, actually. I haven't, because it's been a while since we collaborated, because she kind of started working with independently as well, doing author and illustration. And our collaborations were through the 80s and 90s, I mean. We just, I don't know, the demands of my life, I think, too. I became a full-time artist in 1992 when I separated from my husband with 2 small children. And that was kind of luckily I didn't think about it as being scary at all. I just thought, wow, independence, great, let's go.
Right in.
Yep, no money, you know, no floorboards in the house I bought, no bedrooms, no television, no dog. So it was sort of like it was a real commitment, and I won't say that it was easy at all. And so there were many times where I was just trying to make income to support the kids. That was a difficult time, but I also had to take up many opportunities. So if something presented, I would say yes. And again, I've always been a very, my work ethic is really high. So if I'm straddled by deadlines or I need money, specifically if I'm also caring for my children and have to pay bills, I would, again, one of my favorite things, it's not my favorite thing, but it's one of my mechanisms, is that I consistently get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that's when I get 5 hours work done before they could go to school or whatever. I mean, I did my whole PhD like that. I just wrote.
Punishing. It's been the recurring theme of, like, when you hit an obstacle, it just makes you fight harder, like digging deeper.
Yeah, well, my supervisor said, Bronnie, you've done so much research on your, Brad Buckley, his name, he said, so much research on this PhD, you've been doing it, you've got very little to do. I'll give you 6 weeks, write it. And so I got up every morning for, 3 o'clock. I did it all handwritten as well because I can't type. So then I had to get it retyped, and then I had to edit it that way. But I wrote 3 versions by hand.
That is epic.
So that was a lot. And then they got typed and stuff like that. But I did it, and I graduated 61.
No.
Yeah.
That's very
go the old girls.
But it is quite phenomenal that you've managed to strike a really good balance between, like you say, you needed to feed your children, you needed to afford some furniture and keep a roof over your heads and things, but you've not only done that, but you've built an incredibly thriving sort of commercial, you've got a real thriving commercial side to your practice, but you seem to have struck a really lovely balance between making a viable career, but also kind of maintaining your own truth and your own, like, you've got a very clear, very self-assured voice, and how much of a balancing act has it been to sort of preserve or to kind of have those two kind of facets of your work maintained, you know, so making a living, taking all the opportunities, but at the same time sort of preserving your integrity and kind of exploring your own iconography and what you're interested in, which you've managed to do really successfully.
I think it is. It has been a juggle for sure, but like in terms of the commercialization of my work, I don't actually do anything except the books. So I've never let anyone take my imagery and commercialize it and make it into products. In fact, it's one of the largest sort of elements in my work is commissioning as an artist, where I work on health and education outcomes. So I do large strategies to help support our community for the redress against the trauma, intergenerational trauma. So there's been opportunities where I've been offered large amounts of money, but I've said no. I've walked away from them. And I remember in particular one where I was absolutely desperate for money, and I just had a third child, and I had $200 in the bank, and I had a water birth, and the other two children I had at home, and I had $200. I'd done this exhibition called My Life as a Fish, so I interpreted my life instead of being Aboriginal as a fish. And so I had my grandmother's soul and all that stuff. And then that night I went into labour of the exhibition opening.
Wow.
and I went, okay, I better go. Went to the hospital, had the baby, had $200 in the bank. I went, oh my God, what am I going to do? And Quentin Bryce opened that, actually, that one at Coventry. And then they rang me up and they said, oh, the director said, tell Bronnie to have the baby in peace because she's made some money. So I sold a lot of the paintings.
Fantastic.
I don't have money for the whole year. But and also the other instance was that really is prominent in my life was doing these 3 books, Minna, Darangan, and The Whalers. And the stories were collected by Roland Robinson. And I was offered it by HarperCollins, and I said no unless they found that the custodian of the story, the Aboriginal custodian of the story. And I walked away from a big contract then, and they went, okay, we'll find the original custodian, which was up to me. And I had to go and talk to the communities and find out who everyone deemed to be the original custodian. So I've been extremely staunch about staying with the center of my being, and like, it doesn't matter how much money anyone offers me, I don't do anything for money.
No compromise.
Like, yeah, no compromise. And you know, I mean, if I don't like someone, I won't do anything with them. You know, like, I mean, I had an instance where I did a public artwork, and I was trying to explain to this woman that, you know, like, I was trying to bring these stories of the massacre and the colonization of our country, and she burst out laughing. This is a senior public servant, and I had her on speakerphone, and I'm like, and you know, my studio assistants were saying, oh, is she laughing? And I said to her, are you laughing? And she was. So these are the things that we get in every level of every day of every part of your practice. You just have to be so resilient around the ignorance that's prevailing. And I know that woman had, because I just withdrew from what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I know that
with consequences for her.
Yeah, well, I think there's consequences for anyone that's a racist.
Yeah.
There is no place for racism, and I think when you look at the meaning of racism, it's not about the color. It says racism isn't about the color of your skin. It's about thinking you're superior. It never talks about black or white. When you look at the dictionary definition, it says someone considering themselves to be on a higher level than someone else.
That value framing around it, like we were talking about, you know, you were stupid, you were this, you were that. Yeah.
So I think, so I think, it's complex, navigating the art world at the best of time. And as you would know, the literary world as well, it's hard to navigate that. But I think if you have your truth and you live by that, then that's a life well lived.
That's the line you walk down, and that's what guides you.
Mm.
How would you define your truth? Like, if you, and this is not an easy question, but if you had to sort of, sum up because the unifying thread that runs through your work, because you've worked across all sorts of genres. I mean, like we were saying, you've done the books. You started off as a fashion and fabric designer. You work on large scale public installations for sort of communal spaces. I mean, there's all sorts of sort of areas that you're kind of using. We're not using, but areas that are vehicles for your voice. So, like, how would you sum up the common element that all of those have? Like, what's your?
I think I always say it to my children. I think the one of the bravest things that I've always thought is that if you get given one life, then you should live 3, so that you have no regrets.
I love that.
And so my truth is always, like, for instance, now I live off grid on a 17-acre property. That's my ultimate commitment to living in my environment, is that I collect my own water. I have rainwater tanks. I have to run my solar batteries. If I don't have solar batteries, like if I get rainy weather, I put the Jenny on. I'm committed to big veggie garden. I mean, I'm doing this as well, and working with other people on this mountain to live a life where I don't have a big impression on the environment. So that's one of my absolute truths. And I was living off grid apparently in the 1980s at Linesville, but it's I think there's got to be a greater commitment by all of us as individuals to actually care for the environment. And my ultimate truth around my art is bringing the stories of my family and my life, my dad's life, my mum's life, and my cousins and the wider extended family to the surface in this country, and hopefully leaving some kind of legacy that is enduring enough for people to learn from it. That's that's probably where I'm at.
I noticed a little phrase in I think it was in Why I Love Australia, where you just say, I think because one of the things I loved about I think it's in that book that you present the natural world, and then you've also got cityscapes, and you're kind of making these ideas universally applicable and accessible to people, and you had this little phrase in there, anytime, any town, that these things are relevant, all over. I think it was when but yeah, it sounds like there's this ongoing process of kind of making these ideas widely accessible and giving people that sense of connection. And
I think that's a good point, a good segue, because at the end of the day, you can't flog yourself on the festival circuit either, because then you don't do anything. Because you I mean, this sort of COVID and then the development of Zooms, etc., is sort of it's been a really good process in many ways. I mean, Zooms are very inadequate as opposed to talking to the human. But I think you've got to be really careful, and I found this, that I say no a lot, and I'm very comfortable with that. And I've done that now for possibly the last 4 or 5 years, where I've really secured a sort of antenna for only committing to things that I think will have an impact. And I don't do incidental stuff. I'm not interested in speaking to someone every week just to have a popular moment in the world. I don't care about being popular. I think I'm earnest enough to just, I think Sally Morgan said to me once, don't ever, ever want to be famous, Bronnie. Just be well known. And that phrase has always been something that I kind of live by, because you look at fame and sort of the destruction sometimes that it brings to that person's life because they become public property. And I think I've always been really, the resonance of Sally's statement, and that was like the 90s, has always stayed with me, you know, and I don't want to be public property. I just want to be able to participate.
And I think, you know, even if you're sort of staying behind the scenes, your work's highly visible, and that's what's communicating really effectively to people as well. And I mean, that's a vehicle for everything that you want to say, isn't it? And it sounds also, you know, you must need to pick your battles and decide where you're going to channel your energy, because you've got so many fights to fight, and also such a sort of prodigious output of work. I mean, you've done 43 books, and you know, how many exhibitions and
too many.
Too many.
Yeah, but it's so great because I just actually don't do any commercial, like any exhibitions.
Right.
I do participate in some group shows. I've got a touring show that just finished at a local regional gallery at Grafton, which was really just, you know, this exhibition going back that was a tribute to my Uncle Pat, who lived to 94, and I had a very close relationship with him. But ultimately someone said, where do you exhibit your work? And obviously I exhibit it for Marley in a group show, but I just don't understand a profession where you work really, really hard. Like I've got 4 degrees, I'm a woman, I've raised 3 children, my youngest is 23 in 9 days. I've done a lot of work, and I think I have the merit, and I cannot understand how I'm going to give 50% of my income over to a gallery. I just don't understand it. So, and I know that gallerists will throw their hands up in the air and say, but we make you rich, but you know, at what price? And I find it really strange, you know, that, and I've come to that. And largely I'm just painting. Everything that you see and that work's ongoing in my whole studio is for my children. So the legacy will be that probably I won't exhibit any of these works before I die. And the children will have the opportunity to sell those works to make some money for their lives. So I may not even do any major exhibitions. I might just do the public artworks and the books, and, you know, I may not do that exhibition program.
It seems to me that, I mean, I might just be making assumptions here, but it seems to me that the idea of communication is quite central to what you do. Like, it's not just you're not just working in a void, and it's not just a solipsistic endeavor. Like, you're very much interested in connections between people and sharing stories and passing on tales and experiences and things. And I mean, it seems to me like the public artworks and the books, you know, feed into that beautifully, whereas exhibiting as well is a bit more kind of maybe elitist, yeah, and a bit more kind of a sort of closed environment. You know, it's not so kind of like you were saying, you really enjoy the idea of collaboration. And were you saying you were working with your daughter on something?
Yeah, Ella, my son Jack wrote a book called Evil Inside, which is about bullying, and so I illustrated that. And the State Library of New South Wales acquired those illustrations. And then Ella has completed a story that she wrote called Sun and Moon, and I illustrated that. And then I'm wanting to, I've written a story about my dog Amber, who came from Darwin.
Dog book.
Yes, but it is a dog book, but I'm not illustrating it. My youngest daughter, Ruby Rose, just graduated from NAS 18 months ago or 2 years, and she's an epic artist. Like, she's
brilliant,
really great artist. So I'm trying to get my publishers to let her do an illustration. And I think Ella's also got a contract with Muggabulla as well. So she's definitely going to take on the tradition of writing. But they're all artistic. The kids are all artistic and very creative. Yeah, which I'm happy about.
Where they got that from?
I don't know. I think I've always said to them, just be imaginative, and plus, you know, we've lived an imaginative life as well. You know, like just imagine what you want to be, what you want to do, who you are, where you want to go. Have some fun.
Just lovely. And so when you're creating your own work, what's your sort of process like? Like how do you you're obviously quite protective of your time, your creative time, like you dedicate clear time to it and have a chance to really immerse yourself in it. So what does that feel like for you? What's your sort of process?
Well, this morning I was awake at 6:30 taking the dog for a walk on the beach at Belongil, and then I have a large walk while I'm in the studio. Then I will come back and just dedicate several hours. But one of the things that I've always done, because my mother had clots, is I get up every 45 minutes from my work table, and when I was raising the kids, I do some vigorous housework for 15 minutes. So vacuum, dust, whatever, make the beds, put the washing on, but it had to be 150%, like, so very quick, like a sprint.
So basically like jazzercise that house.
Just absolutely flog myself for 15 minutes and then go back and sit down at the table for 45 minutes. And then that way I could do probably 8 to 9 hours of work at the table. I'm incredibly fastidious around my finish. I always know what I'm going to paint. So that's always been a gift that I've had.
You can kind of see it before you paint it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, I mean, you know, I remember when I did doing this children's books, and they said, oh, you have to do a storyboard, and I've done like 12 books, and I said, what's that?
That's what I was interested in, is do you have any kind of like drafting process, or do you just kind of visualize it and then emanate it, make it happen?
Not much. Yeah. My Greta Lemon made me do storyboards, and I only do tiny little drawings and go, I know what I'm doing, because I think my enthusiasm wanes if I have to overdraft anything, because at the spontaneity of actually sort of looking at the white space and then going, oh, I love creating something from nothing. And then using, you know, your brain, your heart, you know, and you just everything that you are to put this onto a page. It sort of dissipates when you have someone telling you that you have to overthink the hell out of it. And I'm like, I don't want to overthink it. So I was quite resistant, but she did make me do that. And so occasionally I'll do a storyboard when I have to suit an editor. But
someone forces you to.
But I'll do it, but it's begrudging. But yeah, I often know the layout, what I want to do, the connection. And I feel I think that's the way I work. I like what's in my mind.
I wonder if that ties into you liking a challenge and a bit of a fight too, because I know a lot of people talk about the tyranny of the blank page and finding that, you know, quite confronting, and you see it and you're like, right.
Yes, absolutely. I just see it as just another adventure. I mean, I think, you know, I think people can be inspired a lot more by their lives if they just looked at the opportunities that could be in front of them creatively. And I've always had a very creative life. So, you know, I was upcycling clothing from bedspreads in the, you know, 80s with a friend, Joe Chapel. I was doing stuff that now is like fashionable in 2021. And it's like, I just think there are opportunities for everyone across the whole world to be more creative, and we definitely would be a much better society if we embrace more creativity for mental health and social inclusion and just our own personal satisfaction.
I really like the way you're talking about creativity and those kind of you know, the gotta use my words here, but the fact that you don't just look at, you know, art for art's sake, but you're really looking at how the sort of artistic mindset affects the kind of zeitgeist and the sort of collective psychology of a community, and how that can be you know, shaped and
Yeah.
and nurtured and built on and kind of passed on, and you
Well,
know.
I think it is transformative, because when my son's 37, and when I was doing the kids' books, when I started in 92, so his age group sort of grew up with them, right? Now they're having children, they're growing up with them. So I'm a second generation sort of influencer on small people's minds. And I'm like, yes,
Yes.
let's just get into those. I think if you can get into the minds and psyche of particularly young people, and also the adults are reading to them. So there's got to be some impact around that. And even if they're just reading the words, like, you know, some people just read words. Well, I like to dramatize words and inflate them and, you know, make them, you know, just exciting for the kid. They've still got the imagery to go back and explore as well. And they may not have seen it before, and they may not see it again, but gives them an opportunity to explore what I'm seeing in the natural world or in the man-made world. Yeah.
Well, that's brilliant. And I'm very, very glad that you don't listen, or you didn't listen to your teachers when they tried to you'd never amount to anything, and that you you just went in there and fought. Because yeah, I think you know, the legacy that you're creating with all of that, with your books and is exactly what we need. You know, like there's the root of all the sort of societal problems is at the moment, I think, can be kind of pinned down to a sort of lack of empathy and lack of accountability, and a kind of a bit of a deadening of the soul as well.
Yeah.
Sort of
I think it's about support and kindness, and it's always about putting yourself in the position of others and going, oh my God, would I like to be treated like that? And so I think you're right. I think globally there is a lack of empathy, because the society has become so mired in capitalism and the pursuit of more. And actually it should be less. And it's an aspirational, you know, it should be a real motivation and an aspirational motivation for all humans on this planet to care more for their country, so that other people get the opportunity to have a life, and not always look at it as the pursuit of having 4 houses and renting an Airbnb and having a better car and all this sort of stuff. Think about someone having shelter. Think about someone being able to get to hospital. Think about someone being able to be given an educational opportunity. Think about refugees. Yeah, we've got a lot of work to do as humanity, but you know, I'm in it.
Yeah, you're doing a lot of it. We're very lucky to have you. So on that note, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm very much looking forward to see what comes out of your current fellowship. That's going to kind of wrap up in 2025, did you say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, it was for 1 year only, but because it's such a large project that I'm doing, it will take me several years. But that's okay. I've got most of the work sort of started and planned. So yeah, like everything, it's patience, time, and just the ability to be able to deliver something that, you know, maybe will have an impact.
Yeah. Well, I hope it's a fulfilling journey. It sounds like it's going to be a difficult one, but an important one.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Bronwyn. It's been
great. Take care.
You too.